Hello, everybody. Happy Sunday. It's game day, Joe. It's time for another episode of the Lions Grid. And, of course, on today's plate, we have the game between your Detroit Lions and the Philadelphia Eagles. Joe, how are you feeling this Sunday morning heading into the game?
Feeling pretty good. I got a good feeling about the Detroit Lions. They're playing good football. Even though they tied week 1, they played good enough football to win that game. Just kind of had a meltdown in the fourth quarter. And we saw in game 2, they corrected that and kind of came out, made some plays, clutch plays down the stretch to get a victory. If you had to rank the two games, you would say they would lose to the Chargers and beat the Cardinals. But to be 1-0-1 on the season is better than expectations after 2 weeks.
Yeah, certainly. There, as we've mentioned previous times, there was that ESPN projection that had them starting out 0-11. So, certainly, I think people still a little disappointed that couldn't pull out that win against Arizona. But you really can't beat the 1-0-1 start. Definitely sets them up for success. And we've been talking all week, Joe, during the other videos about the injuries for Philadelphia. So I think a good place to start when talking about today's game is the inactive players for both teams. We'll start with the Lions side of things. Deshaun Hand out. Ode Obashi out. Jeff Driscoll not suiting up. Amani Owarie out. Travis Fulgham out. Bo Benchall out, and the newly acquired Paul Perkins out for the Lions. So you'll notice no Jarrad Davis, no Taylor Decker. That means they should be a go here today against the Eagles.
It's going to be exciting to see Jarrad Davis get back in action. First game of the season. Interesting to see how they're going to, play both Tavai and Davis at the linebacker position.
Yeah, if they can find a good way to have them both on the field and contribute, could be, like we've talked about, it could go from the linebacking core being one of the concerns on the team to being one of the strengths on the defensive side of things. Because so far, Jelani Tavai has looked well worth that second-round pick. So if Jarrad Davis can get it going and we can get both of them out there on the field making plays, that'll be great for the Lions' defense.
Yeah, what we might see is more of Tavai and Davis instead of Christian Jones, because I know he's listed in there at the right outside linebacker spot, but his name is yet to come up during any of the games. He hasn't made too many plays, so interesting to see about play time, whether or not they're going to do some swapping now that they got Davis back, but we'll have to see as the game goes on. I know Kennard in week 1 had 3 sacks. 0 last week, but that's definitely a great way to start the season. Hopefully he has some success today.
Certainly, I think getting some pressure on Carson Wentz is going to be important. And, of course, the Eagles coming off a really tough game against Atlanta last week where they suffered quite a few injuries. The inactive players for the Eagles today include Deshaun Jackson, who we already knew would be missing this week. Alshon Jeffrey was listed as questionable. He is out today. Corey Clement, Sharif Miller, Camus Greiger-Hill, Nate Herbig, and Tim Jernigan, who are both Herbig is a guard and Jernigan, well, he's a defensive tackle. But some of the big hog mollies there hurt for the Eagles on top of that wide receiver core that's been a little decimated by injuries. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens for the Eagles in that passing game. Really, because of the injuries there, Zach Ertz is probably the biggest name left for the Eagles in that passing attack. So he led the Eagles last week. He had 16 targets, but he didn't score a touchdown until late in the third quarter. I think for them to be more successful, they're probably clearly they're going to be trying to go through him because he's their most reliable player left in that passing attack. But as far as the Eagles are concerned, they'll probably want to get him into the end zone, hopefully sooner than the third quarter if they want to come out here against the Lions and be victorious.
Yeah, the absence of those 2 wide receivers for the Eagles is definitely going to give the Lions a better chance in this game because I know yesterday I was watching a little bit of the Central game and, even watching some of the Michigan game. The biggest problem was these receivers getting downfield and then not being able to catch the ball. A lot of drops And those are two of your more primary targets on the Eagles. So when these backups come in, playing the 1, 2, and 3 wide receiver position, you're going to have to see. I mean, I know they're NFL players, so they're going to make catches. But if they can consistently run the routes, get open, and make catches against much improved Detroit Lions secondary, then it could be a tough day for the defense of the Lions. But right now, when you look at the matchups, I think we have a better chance with our cornerbacks matching up against the starting wide receivers of the Eagles. But, then again, Darius Slay, our number one guy, got beat last week a lot of the time against Keenan Allen. So he might want to have something to prove here today, or maybe some of the same play from last week. But there's also talk about Jalen Ramsey coming to the Detroit Lions, saying they want to trade him to the Lions for 2 first-round picks in 2020 and 2021. I don't know about that move. He's a personality, and generally the Lions don't go with personality when it comes to, taking on like a character like Antonio Brown or Jalen Ramsey or these guys that generate a lot of hype. And I kind of feel like our secondary is already solid, and we don't really need to make that move unless we come out of the bye still undefeated.
Yeah, and I did see on ESPN also this morning when I was just watching the, as they're getting ready for a Sunday full of football, I did see come across the ticker that Jacksonville at this time, since they coming off that win against Tennessee, are no longer interested in trading Jalen Ramsey. I mean, we'll have to see what happens there. We talked about it last week too. I'm still not opposed to trying to go and get Trent Williams from Washington to shore up that offensive line. But speaking of the offensive line, Joe, last week they were able to keep Matt Stafford clean, give him time to throw the ball. I think if they gave up a sack, maybe they gave up one, but I want to say they didn't really give up anything, and that really helped Matt Stafford to have time to distribute the ball. And look, the Chargers have a pretty good pass rush with Joey Bosa, Melvin Ingram. This week is also going to be a challenge. Obviously, you have Fletcher Cox. He's a all-pro defensive tackle. You have Brandon Graham, Derek Barnett. There's a couple that, there are people who can get after the quarterback on that Eagles offensive line. Taylor Decker coming back into the mix. It's going to be interesting to see who actually gets the start at left tackle, if they are going to try and insert Taylor Decker back in there. Of course, he struggled there pretty mightily in week 1 against the Cardinals. I think that could be one of the keys to deciding this game, because if the Lions can have that same level of success they had against the Chargers, who again have a pretty formidable pass rush, if they can do that here against Cox, Barnett, and Graham, and give Stafford the time he needs to make the throws, that secondary for the Eagles is not very good. So if they can give him time to throw the ball, could be something that can help Stafford establish himself and get that Lions passing attack off on a roll. But again, it's not an easy task. Those are 3 really good pass rushers. The Lions offensive line has their work cut out for them this week.
What I'm looking to see the offensive line and even the head coach do with Taylor Decker is give him a few series. I think he's going to start, but if he starts to struggle early on, I don't think it's something that they're going to hesitate to pull him and switch in the backup tackle. I think he played great last week, not giving up any sacks and just 2 QB pressures, I think was all that I saw. But yeah, I think that they have options at left tackle, and that's not a bad thing. But yeah, and to talk about the offensive line, the guard position that we were really worried about. I know week 1 we didn't talk about the start that Joe Dahl got. But yeah, instead of Kenny Wiggins playing there, they put in Dahl. And he hasn't really been he hasn't really gotten too much attention or negative attention for giving up plays. So that position seems a little bit more solid. I know it was a big question mark coming into the season. And now we're talking about the left tackle position where we have a little bit of depth. Both guys can get the job done depending on the week. So I'm kind of feeling pretty good. There's no injuries on the offensive line, and feeling pretty comfortable about it. They've done a pretty good job of keeping Stafford safe. So they're going to have to continue that today. And what I really want to see when we talk about the big guys in the trenches is I want to see more pressure from our defensive line. They were a big talk about, how much talent we have on the defensive line. I know the underrated guy, Romeo Aquar, he had like 9, 7, 8 sacks last year, and he hasn't gotten any this year. Trey Flowers, big free agent, hasn't done anything. And Mike Daniels, Ashawn Robinson, and Snacks Harrison, they haven't made too many plays. Granted, they've stopped the run a little bit, but they're still giving up over 3 yards per carry, unlike we saw in the last few weeks of the regular season last year. So I really hope the D-line has a better attack and pressure on the quarterback this week.
Yeah, it certainly hasn't lived up to expectations. The Lions did invest rather heavily in in that defensive line. To your point, Trey Flowers, Mike Daniels. Of course, they signed Snacks to that extension, and he hasn't necessarily had so far through 2 games hasn't had a huge impact. It's going to be interesting, and I think you're right. For the Lions to be successful, they are going to need that team, need their defense to step up more here moving forward, because so far, particularly that defensive line unit to step up, because so far, it's been a little lackluster. They haven't impressed. Like, they haven't played poorly, but they also haven't played. It was supposed to be a strength for the team, right? So they haven't lived up to being a strength for that defensive unit. They've just been sort of, okay. But we'll have to see. It's certainly going up against this Philadelphia Eagles offensive line, which is a rather veteran offensive line. Of course, they have the standout center in Jason Kelce. They're talented up front, so it's a tough task going up against. You would have thought the offensive line where they could have came out and made a statement would have been the Arizona Cardinals offensive line, because they're not particularly thought of as a good unit. A tough task to ask them to get it going up against the Eagles here, but certainly, hopefully something they can do, because again, I think to your point, Joe, it's going to be crucial for the defense's overall success. And kind of interesting, last year the Lions defense was one of the best defenses against the run. This year, not as well. We're giving up 124.5 yards per game. On the ground, I want to say, compared to the Eagles, who are only giving up 42.5 yards per game on the ground. So the Eagles currently the 3rd best rushing defense in the league. It's our rushing attack as the Lions hasn't been particularly effective. And the fact that we're going up against one of the top rushing defenses in the league could make that a tough task. So, like I said, I think the best way for the Lions to have success offensively is going to be through the passing attack, because we already know Eagles have a very stout rush defense. But, again, a lot of it's going to come down to whether or not they can give Stafford the time to distribute the ball, because that secondary is vulnerable. That front 7, not as vulnerable for the Eagles.
Yeah, another thing we're going to have to watch in this game is special teams play. Is Prater going to have a bounce-back week? Is he going to make his field goals? Is there going to be a replacement at the kick return, punt return position for Jamal Agnew? That'll be something to watch and keep an eye on, or does he get another chance? I didn't hear any news about releasing him or benching him or anything, so we'll have to see what the decision is on that. But I am feeling pretty good about this game. The Eagles haven't looked too much of a dominant team. They were in my power rankings after week 1. They played pretty well and came back and got the victory. But week 2, they lost to a team that got smoked by Minnesota, the Atlanta Falcons. Mm-hmm. So, really it's a toss-up on what they're going to do today. I know they're favored by 6.5 points. And to me, that's a lot of points in a very That's a touchdown victory, and I really don't think the Lions are going to lose by that much if they do lose. I think the odds are in favor for the Lions to come out here and play more of an effective game on offense. And if they can't connect the passing game for the Eagles, it's going to be tough for them to put up points. And if they keep trying to run the ball, which is probably the game plan, knowing that we give up 124 yards on the ground, I would think that the defense would be prepared for that. And instead of going with a 3 defensive line, 1 DT and 2 defensive ends, we'll throw in that other defensive tackle in there, clog up the run, and not to mention Gerard Davis is a better run stopper than he is a zone coverage guy. So that's going to boost up the rush defense as well. So I'm looking forward to seeing how this game plays out. It is Philadelphia. They're only a few years removed from winning the Super Bowl. And a lot of the guys that are on the team were on that team at the time, or at least half. So I would say that, Philadelphia is still definitely a good team. But, these Lions are, gaining a little bit of momentum, gaining a little bit of positivity. There's people out there that are naysayers. You look at the Detroit Lions fans, and they're constantly saying how bad of a team they are. Calvin's ripping on them for, his signing bonus and everything like that. And I just think the Lions are at that point, along with Martha Ford and the change of culture with Patricia and Quinn, that they're out to make a statement this season. And what better way to do so than going into Philadelphia, a team that's picked to win their division and go high in the playoffs and coming out and getting a victory. So I'm kind of amped up for this game. 2 shots of espresso, feeling good. And, rooting for the Lions today. I got my jersey on, so jersey and hat, I'm all set. Got my gear on.
Ready in full regalia for the game. I like it. And yeah, I mean, obviously, Joe, we did our pick'em segment yesterday. You're going with the Lions in this. I did take the Eagles, and we've been talking about it all week. I certainly think there is an opportunity for Detroit to come into Philly and leave with a win. That wouldn't surprise me if that outcome did happen. The reason I'm going with the Eagles myself is more along the lines of, if you look back to week 1, that game against the Cardinals, I think, was a game the Lions should have won. And, we both projected them to win heading in there. Unfortunately, they came out with the tie. Definitely not doom or gloom, but this is a game, at the beginning of the season, and even with all the injuries, if you look around at the predictions by the bigger media corporations, they're all still picking the Eagles to get the win. So, and with the line being at 6.5, as you mentioned, in favor of the Eagles, it's certainly a game the Lions, on paper, shouldn't win. There's certainly the opportunity to win, which is fantastic. But to your point, I think this could be a really important game for the Lions, because typically in these situations, the Lions don't come out of these games with a win. If they do come in here and manage to get a win in Philadelphia, winning a game they shouldn't, on paper they shouldn't win, that's big. Not only would that make them 2-0-1 and have them in a good shape, but that's something we don't necessarily see out of the Lions in years past, in past seasons. They don't win games they shouldn't win. They tend to, outside of that Patriots game last year, typically games where the Lions are predicted to lose, they tend to oblige there. So certainly going to be watching the game, excited for it. Could have been easily either of our games of the week, but we of course, since we do the episode here today just dedicated to the game itself, we tend to stay away from the Lions as our games of the week pick for the pick'em segment. So it should be a good game. Of course, the last time these two teams met was back in the 2016 season. The Lions did win that game 24-23. And I think the only thing we haven't mentioned about this upcoming matchup, Joe, is, of course, the defensive coordinator for the Philadelphia Eagles is Jim Schwartz, former Detroit Lions head coach. Some people have been making a big deal about that matchup. Of course, he's very familiar with Matt Stafford and some of the other personnel that is, I think, for the most part, there's been a lot of turnover outside of Matt Stafford since Schwartz was the head coach, but he certainly seems to have found. Of course, he won a Super Bowl with the Eagles as their defensive coordinator. He's carved out a very good role as a defensive coordinator with the Eagles. So it's obviously much has changed for both teams since he was here in Detroit, but I think on the flip side of it, in terms of Schwartz being very familiar with Stafford and what he's capable of course, that means that Stafford is familiar with what Schwartz likes to do on the defensive side of things, and that might be a benefit to the Lions.
Yeah, I was always I accepted Jim Schwartz as a coach. I thought he was good. Maybe a little bit, explosive in some areas. I know there was the game against Houston on Thanksgiving when, there was the play of whether or not the guy was down or not. He ran down the field, got on the field, threw the challenge flag. For some reason, it didn't allow it to play out because he had a penalty on him or something, and ended up giving 7 points, huge 70-yard plus play to the defense. And I think that was a big mistake that kind of, gave him a bad reputation after that game. And, then there was the shake with Jim Harbaugh,
Mm-hmm.
who, was just like treating him like a chump. And, who's the chump now? He's got a Super Bowl victory, and Harbaugh can't get a victory against a ranked opponent on the road. So, there's that. I always thought he was a decent head coach. Maybe it was a little bit too early in his career to be an effective head coach, or maybe if they gave him a longer tenure, he would have been more successful. But we saw Jim Caldwell coming in after Jim Schwartz, being very effective, having a winning record and taking the team to the next level. Winning record, unfortunately, it didn't pan out in any playoff victories. But what we see here with Matt Patricia is a rebuild year, 6-10, and now it's we have to make a push for not only the division but a playoff victory to show that the Lions have been improving ever since 2000 in the Matt Millen era. And it's been a slow build over 19 years since 2000, but it's going in the right direction. And this game is going to be a contest between two defensive-minded coaches. Of course, the former Detroit Lions coach and the current Detroit Lions coach from the New England Patriots, who has gotten victories that are against good teams. And that's one thing that Stafford always struggled on, was getting victories against ranked opponents. And I look for Patricia to continue to escalate as a head coach this season. I had doubts about him the first couple of the first season, majority in the first few games of preseason, but I like what he and the offensive coordinator has come up with in the first 2 weeks of the season. He was ranked one of the worst coaches in the NFL recently, what I saw from a Philadelphia writer. So I'm sure he probably heard about that or saw that. So he's got something to prove to them this week, a little bit of chip on his shoulder. So should be a competitive football game.
Yeah, certainly. I think whether you think the Lions are going to win or you think the Eagles are going to win, I think most people feel pretty confident in saying this should be a pretty close matchup between these two teams. And to your point, Joe, the best way to to show that the team is trending in the right direction is to come out here and prove it on the field. So Lions did a great job of getting that win last week at home against the Chargers, another very tough team. Now they have a chance here against the Eagles to potentially, again, show some of the doubters that they are for real. But, of course, it will be a tough ask. It's hard to go into Philly and get a win. But, the opportunity is certainly there. They just have to go and seize it. All right,
yeah, I keep wanting to take that tie and move it into a loss or a win column, and it's just bugging me. It's not perfect, and I'm a cut and dry, like either it's official or unofficial, and now they got a tie, and neither of it's official. It's just like, well, we don't know what to do with it, and it's like I can't figure it out,
Yeah,
it's gonna bug me all season long.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you're not really sure how it's going to impact. At the end of the season, it might be helpful. It might be hurtful, but really you're not going to know until all the cards are down on the table whether or not that tie against the Cardinals, what sort of impact that's going to have on the Lions' playoff hopes. So. Certainly, I'm there with you. It'd be nice to know how it was going to impact it, but right now that's up in the air. All right, well, we're 14 minutes away from kickoff here. Of course, the game starts at 1 o'clock on Fox. So we will wrap up today's show. Again, I think, Joe, it should be I think we've both been echoing the same thought that this should be a pretty good game here with the Eagles, of course. Your game of the week is also during the 1 o'clock slot. Just go ahead and remind everybody your Baltimore Kansas City matchup. So obviously, I think a lot of people who are Detroit fans will be tuned into that game with the Lions and the Eagles. But if you're sort of if you're multi-TVing it, or if you have the red zone on, hopefully you'll be seeing some action from both of those games. But that will do it for our pregame episode here today. If you did enjoy the show, please do help the channel grow. Go ahead and hit that like button or subscribe if you haven't done so already. We have a goal of reaching 100 subscribers so we can get a custom URL for our YouTube channel. We're making great progress towards it, but if you haven't done so already, please consider doing it because it will help us out tremendously. That'll be, I think our next episode will be tomorrow, Joe, as we sort of recap what unfolds here on the field today on Sunday. Whether it be a Lions victory or a defeat, we'll be back to give you our reactions to what unfolds in Philly this afternoon. Until the next video, I'm Kevin Marheine. He's Joe Wilmot. We'll see you tomorrow if you want to tune in for the recap video. See ya!